But I've come to think about other things. My way of writing, I think, well, pass on a subject which I think will bring me to interesting people and interesting places. And I still have a great friend from Balliol days who was persuaded by an eminent ecclesiastical historian to specialize in monastic history. And he went off to the monasteries to look at their manuscripts. I went off to Vienna. And we exchanged greetings every Christmas. And each time he says, I made a terrible mistake. I've been in these boring monasteries while you've been going all over the world having a good time. And so I passed on a subject which I think would be interesting and take me to fun people and seeing fun places. And luckily it did, because I was able to go to Eastern Europe frequently from the 1960s onwards, when the Federation period battlefields were they've been unchanged. And I used to go into international conferences, and there I'd meet representatives from what you call Iron Curtain countries, sort of historians, senior officers. They get into chat, and they say, well, why don't you come and look us up sometime? And at Sandhurst, I made a point of having the lowest possible security clearance. So I had no access to any kind of NATO-type secrets at that level.
Right.
Although I came to specialize in Northern Ireland affairs. I came to know a lot about Northern Ireland. Went on operations there quite a lot. But anything regarding, say, NATO and the Warsaw Pact, I had no security clearance. Mm-hmm. And I found that the people I met at these conferences knew very well my career, so-called and background. And they knew I was just basically a straightforward historian. So I'd go there and I'd meet these people and hire a car and simply go around East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia as it was then, and Hungary. And I never had any trouble at all with anybody, absolutely none. And the NVA, the Volksarmy of East Germany,
yes.
I went to their historical headquarters in Potsdam and had two great friends there, a major general and a colonel, and they gave me a sort of chit to show if I got into any trouble, and maps and things like that. I just had to count off I went. And you to be driving along, find yourself inside the middle of a Russian convoy, the tanks in front of you and behind you. And that is quite normal, actually. And at Potsdam, they had a kind of some bratty store, a sort of Frankfurter store, and there'd be sort of Russian soldiers there with their beer, and I had beer, some sausages as well. Really very, very weird atmosphere. But what I liked about was the frisson, the buzz about it. You never quite knew what was going to happen. And there could be, at any moment, a disaster, but it never actually happened. And you never had the kind of adventures you'd have in the old days. For example, I was in a little place in Silesia. I can't remember its name now, and I couldn't find the hotel. And I stopped. A policeman on his motorbike came up and stopped. And I said, well, can you tell me the way to the hotel? He said, yes, sir. And he put his siren and lights on. We sort of tore through the cobbled streets at about 80 miles an hour. And I sort of arrived totally shattered at the hotel, sort of gibbering and shaking. And that sort of thing wouldn't happen now. And in the hotel, I met the head of the head of the local football team, which is a very, very sort of famous team in Poland. He said, let's go and have a dinner, which we did. And all that in the course of one day, which the kind of stuff you never have nowadays. Now, one thing I've never done, sat down and said, I'm going to set out to prove that.
Ah, okay.
And I think that's that many people make that mistake. They say, well, basically, what I've got this thesis, I'm going to stick to it. And whatever happens, I'm going to stick by it for the rest of my life. And I've found that so often. Terrible. And they feel sort of on a bend, first of all, to defend their thesis, regardless.
Yeah.
Well, our approach has always been, well, there's going to be something interesting here. I'll pile up material regardless where it comes from. Anything likely to be interesting, I simply heap it up in a great hot compost heap and let it heat up spontaneously. And then you find it starts talking to you. So talking compost heap, I call it. And you don't have to think about things. All the things emerge, and they dictate what you actually write. And again, no conscious process of thought, no plan. It just arrives from the compost pile heap, really.
Just a process of observation, really. Yeah.
Yes, and you don't think about, well, how am I going to address this problem? Well, the idea comes to you when you're mowing the lawn or when you wake up in the morning, and you're guided by it. And then the book comes out. And I'm always dissatisfied with what I've written, and this is why you find so many second editions.
Yes.
Because I disagree with what I wrote. Stuff I thought about more, things I found out, and things which other people have written. And, for example, I'm thinking I've done 2 books on the Jacobite Rising of the 45,
yes.
and now I've got more than enough to do not a completely new one, but a substantially altered version of the last edition to make it the 3rd, which I found, for example, your new material very, very, very fascinating.
I'm delighted to hear.
It's I've never come across before, correspondence at the regimental level about recruits, who's providing these recruits, where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Which you don't find anywhere else. And
yeah, I think...
I don't know what I'm just thinking about it. I find a lot of people embark on a big book and simply get tired of it. They get sort of enter lassitude and periods of saying, well, why am I doing this? Now, what I do is I sort of collect any material which I think might be useful in any context. And so I'm sometimes find myself going back to stuff I noted 60 years ago and haven't seen since. But basically, I think I usually, for that reason, have 2 or 3 books on the go at any given time. Because then you can switch between them. Because each is at a different stage. Might be one doing basic research, other writing, other sort of looking up bibliographies and that sort of thing. And I find switching between subjects and stages prevents you getting fed up with a particular book. Because you've got the mood to do certain things, like doing an index or whatever. Other times you want to write, and you just say, well, I'll do it. That's what I feel like doing. Now, another thing, basically, I enter into contracts for a book at a very late stage. What I'd like to do is come up with a pretty definitive text, right? Which means you don't, without any contract to work to, you can work at your own speed. I would then go to a likely publisher and say, look at this is what I've done on that. And pretty well, I found they would accept it as it stands. If you sign a contract, usually for about 3 years, and you're starting from scratch, you get nowhere of any value. As I can sort of take my time, and what is brought before the publisher is probably the fruits of perhaps 20 or more years of actual research and writing and shaping and fine-tuning. And they find they don't need to do anything or very little with it.
Right.
Now, another aspect of that is with the endless turmoil in the book trade, publishers coming and going, editors coming and going, even 3 years is a very long time to have a book lodged with a particular publisher, because you have publishers coming and going and editors coming and going.
Right.
Endless Paris revolutions. And a new editor will have not just no interest in pushing a book commissioned by a previous editor, but will actually have an interest in not getting it published at all. And the longer you have the span of contact between signing the contract and producing the actual text, the more at risk you are nowadays. Now, I've got so many people who've had this experience. They've all signed up with a publisher, going very well, change of editor, change of publisher, that's it. I never had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a sort of familiar way of doing things, but it works. Now, sorry, I haven't answered your questions, but there were so many things I would forget unless I'd actually brought them up with you as soon as they came to mind. Because, I found I had such a lot of odds and ends used from my previous 18th century books. I sort of shuffled them together into a text. So I didn't have to do much new research further. I used also odd unused bits and odds and ends and observations and threw them together in that. That's one of my favourite books, actually.
I think it's a book that you're very well known for. Yes.
And the book I loved in that, the one I loved is Lamina's study in the 1740s. I can't remember his 1730s. I can't remember the Spanish title. But it's a wonderful book. Because he goes, not only gives a review of actually how you manage as an officer, but how you manage your career as an officer, how you evade blame when something goes wrong, and how you hog all the credit when it goes right. And what kind of crops, best kind of crops to hide in when you're sort of mounting an ambush. That's lovely stuff. Again, the stream of consciousness continuing. I realised that I had a very, very strong instinct, admiration for order and discipline and structure. Very pronounced right through my life. This is why I admired so much the Catholic Church before the Vatican Council, and why I got assimilated so quickly into working 35 years for the army, and why I've had since 2002 the wonderful time with the court witness service, working with the law. And I approach a lot of my writing in the same way, which is why you find, generally speaking, my books fall into two sections. One would be a sort of analytical section, and the other a narrative section. And I'm always analysing things. Are there patterns there? There are things why I like artillery fortification so much in the classic period. It's all about geometry and imposing order.
Yes. And
having that all in a separate section or indeed a separate volume makes your narrative, you can roam free in your narrative. But you don't have to explain anything basic. You take such a lot for granted. And let this sort of narrative carry you along. Which is why my books, I think, appeal very much to people who perhaps they can appeal both to serious militarist ones and others who just like reading about history in general.
Yeah.
And unconsciously, I think I've reached both the audiences. And I have noticed in the States in particular, my prime readership is very obviously among men in uniform. I've noticed it begins at the airport with the guys examining the passports. Oh, you're Christopher Duffy, are you? What do you think about Lee at mathematics or whatever? And this holds up the whole passport queue. It happens almost every time. And the German television program television channel did a program in Chicago about 10 years ago, and they sort of Chicago street scene, and there was a cop leaning against a wall reading one of my books. And this is quite bizarre. Prison guards like my books as well. So it's very, very about. I don't know what my readership is, but this is certainly a big element of it. And I think the trouble with being an author, you never know who actually reads your books, what kind of person do. But this is something which has struck me very, very forcibly. This is the kind of person who people who like structure. And my books are like almost like historical procedurals, really. Because I think if you read my books, you can work out how things were done. And it's a bit rigid, bit mechanical, but it's the way I like writing.
Mm.
But I think I ran out of my stream of consciousness now.
No, it's perfect. If I might return to the 70s, I think, for a moment. What was it like to work on the War and Peace program?
That was terrible.
Okay.
A very amusing one. Now, it was done by the BBC, and the shooting was going to be done in what was then Yugoslavia. And I was working on it with David Chandler. We put a lot of work into it.
Mm.
And we were promised the services of the Serbian army. And then we got out to Belgrade at a time, what happened was, well, the BBC decided they wouldn't go ahead with the program, and they cancelled all the contracts with the costumier, and so all the uniforms and weapons were returned to warehouses. And then they suddenly decided they would take the program on. They would do the series, and that meant that we had to be at sort of Belgrade Airport in the middle of the night, some nights, taking stuff out of crates and identifying what it was.
Oh, God.
And when we got to the location at Bela Crkva, which is I found the most fascinating part of the world, it's in the Banat of Temeshvar, by the Danube, very, very evocative. Great sand dunes, great rolling Danube, strange birds and animals. It didn't impress the other people on the team at all, but I found it a fascinating environment. And we were just about to go when the Yugoslavia was threatened by the Russians. And a general mobilization was called. And we were confined to our hotel for a bit. And for the Yugoslav army was substituted basically the Serbian militia. A mutinous gang of people. And so the whole thing was a running disaster from start to finish. An absolute disaster. And it wasn't helped because of the culture of television production at that time. So for the BBC anyway, it was highly unionized. And that meant that all the camera crews and so on would only work to certain set hours. And you'd have a big scene set up, a big convoy, carts and guns, and say, oh, it's 12 o'clock, it's time for us to have lunch. And they'd have lunch from 12 to 2, and then, because of the light will go orange from about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you had about an hour's worth of shooting.
Mm.
And all the poor guys, or the soldiers, the horses, were sort of left in this excruciating sunshine.
Mm.
It was very hot. It was August. Imagine the Danube in August in the Central Europe. And these poor guys had nothing to drink, nothing to eat. And they could see these camera people, and above all, what we call very aptly the camp dressers. The people who arranged the costumes of the principals. And they're all girls or homosexuals, basically. And they would go sort of prancing around in all their prancery, whatever, and having some iced drinks and umbrellas. And the poor guys in the uniforms could see this going on. And one day we had a massive mutiny. And they rose up en masse. And we were surrounded by a mob of this Serbian militia gesticulating with their weapons. Now, I'd taken charge of what reconstructed the Revsky read out and briefed the gunners there. I got on very well with them. And so I retreated to my gunners and the rest who read out. And we held out there till the mutiny dispersed. The whole thing was a disastrous program. If I'd known, in the beginning, I would have walked out. So I don't want to talk about that. It's like you can make a comic film of it, actually. But, it was typical of the 1970s, really. But so there we are. I don't want to talk about that. That's one of my disasters. I don't want to talk about it.
If the Cumberland papers, what do you think of using those as a source, especially because the British Crown does so poorly in the War of Austrian Succession on the battlefield.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah.
And very crucially, the crucial importance of the Battle of Culloden, because coming to the closing phase, the Battle of Culloden, and you have Cumberland advancing from Nairn, advancing for the east, and he knows that the Jacobites are somewhere around in front of him, but he doesn't know whether they're going to be directly in front of him, between him and Inverness, or down on the other side of the valley of the River Nairn to the south or the left. And he actually writes, basically what happened was I remember my conversation with the Field Marshal Koenigsegg and how he dealt with the Turks, because he never knew which the Turks were going to attack from, or where he was going to find them. So he said, well, Koenigsegg and I, we both reached the same conclusions. We had a march formation which could deploy into lines, whether to one flank or the other, or to the front. Which is what he did on his advance to the Jacobites at Culloden.
So it's really Austrian-Turkish experience that is informing.
Yes, he says I got this from the Austrian experience against the Turks.
That's brilliant.
He's a very well read guy, and sort of contradictory, because he's a kind of person who could have been a bad man, but he could have been a very good one. Like Lincoln was a bad man who could have been a very good one. Lincoln was a good man who could have been a very bad one. Which is why he's so fascinating. But it's a very complicated character. But there's been biography of Cumberland by Rex Whitworth, but it's valueless, because he never looked at the Cumberland papers. Nobody. I think I was the first person who actually used the Cumberland papers in any context at all. And what
I believe it.
And what I found was, at the end of each box, as it was then, you'd find all the captured Jacobite papers for that month.
Yes.
And they'd be encapsulate everything he'd found, hundreds and hundreds of letters and other documents. And I found that absolutely invaluable. Another thing before I forget, what's been taking up actually most of my time for the last couple of years is the issue of conservation at Culloden.
Yes.
And the battlefield is very much under threat of development. And I've been passionate about conservation since 1948, I think it was, when I was watching a newsreel in a cinema of the sinking of a French Revolutionary period ship of the line by the Royal Navy in that year, 18.
Yes, I've seen that newsreel. It's on the internet now. Yes, it's a 74 gun ship, I think. Yeah.
And I was so horrified. Like, how can they do that?
Yeah.
And I'm making some headway at Culloden because I've been spending a lot of work, hours and hours, trading through hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of correspondence which you can get on the internet. And I found basically almost all the intrusions on the battlefield have been engineered by a single firm of building consultants, not individual initiatives. And there's one, the most damaging of the lot, which involves building a 1 kilometre long hardtop road straight across the battlefield. I believe there's implication of the University of Glasgow, because I think it's running at one remove a company of commercial archaeologists and taking its profits. And if this is true, it would implicate the University of Glasgow in the destruction of the battlefield of Culloden. And this is how things are done.
Wow.
It just sort of, it's the last thing I should be doing, because I have a very severe heart condition. And I've had a series of 3 fractures of the ribs, of the vertebrae this last year.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and I can hardly walk at all. It's the last thing I should be doing, but I get so incensed about it. The trouble is, nobody else will put their head above the parapet.
Yeah.
I found so many people who thought were good, reliable people, they just sort of chicken out at the last moment. And there's a tiny group of about 6 of us who are sort of labouring away. And our efforts were recognised last week by the Highland Council, and this is the local government for the whole of the north and west of Scotland, who issued an open letter praising my efforts, but specifically, and saying, why is nobody taking notice of this research? And criticised what a department of the Scottish government, Historic Environment Scotland, for effectively refusing to use my work. And it's caused a sensation in Scotland, so I think we're getting somewhere.